Turns out you need a permit to bring a horse into Manhattan. The horse box was stopped on the way in. There's more than $100 trillion of payments that go around the world between businesses, done human to human. It's actually a communication and negotiation problem. It's not a payments problem at all.
My guest today is Duncan Barrigan, founder and CEO of Lunos or Lunos. We're going to find out which one it is, an AI partner that manages receivables the way you would if you worked on it 24/7, never forgot a thing, and read every message anyone ever sent you. Before Lunos, Duncan spent 8 years at GoCardless, helping take it from a UK direct debit provider to a global payments unicorn. He could have built almost anything next, but instead, he chose one of the least glamorous but most impactful corners of the business, getting paid. That choice is what I want to get into today, because behind it is a question every founder eventually faces. Do you chase the shiny thing or the thing you can't stop thinking about? And what if those two things are different? Duncan kept coming back to finance people spending 10 hours on a single invoice, to a CFO whose accounts payable team had standing orders not to pay the lawyers until they chased him personally. Work that's been done the same way for hundreds of years by humans badly. This is a conversation about Lunos, and it's a conversation about conviction, what it looks like to bet your career on a problem most people walk past, and why the most human stories are often hiding inside the most technical ones. Duncan Barrigan, welcome to the bigger stage.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. It's great to be here.
So the question everybody is asking, or they should be, is it Lunos or is it Lunos? Please declare the definitive answer. The people want to know.
I think that it is Lunos, but every American that sees the word afresh says Lunos. So it's kind of, founder meets reality. And I think reality is probably going to win, but at the moment I still say Lunos, and then everyone else says Lunos, exactly as you did.
It's the, look, it's the fate of any good Englishman who's operating in Manhattan. Another Englishman in Manhattan trying to fight the culture that just wants to make an O a hard O. What can I say? But what isn't hard is having this conversation, because it's a lot of fun. We got a chance to meet in person the other day in your office, which was an absolute blast. And I'm basically looking forward to continuing that conversation on camera and sharing that with the world. So first, we're going to get into your journey, and as I alluded to in the intro, but let's just put on record, whether it's Lunos or Lunos, it's a pretty cool company. It's new, but just explain what it's all about and who you serve and what problem you solve.
As you say, it's a problem that is, don't think anyone's described it as sexy, but it is extremely, extremely large. So for anyone who's not familiar with it, there's more than $100 trillion of payments that go around the world between businesses through ways that I would say thousands rather than hundreds of years have been done human to human. So the very first writing was ledgers, was invoices and receipts. And since then, humans have done work with each other, and they have, written it down, whether it's on a stone tablet, whether it is on a laptop, in a CSV, in a spreadsheet, whatever. And it's been done with humans. And we call them accounts receivable and accounts payable teams. And this $100 trillion plus world has just operated human to human for as long as writing. We're building the AI agents that will turn that into an agent to agent problem, not a human to human problem.
Which, the agent to agent solutions are coming in so many different ways in business and in life. And have been here actually for a little while already in some corners. But how are you setting out to do it differently than it's currently being done that is an improvement on our current reality?
I think that for my entire time at GoCardless, I was naturally, you're kind of biased by what you're doing, right? So we were, as you said, pulling money from people's bank accounts when it's due, and I would go and speak to these companies with enormous accounts receivable teams, tens of people doing this, and we'd kind of be saying, look, why don't you just pull the money out of someone's bank account when it's due? It's functionally what we'd be saying to them. And, sometimes that was the right answer, honestly. But, it still only covers a couple of percent. I mean, it's still a vast amount, but it's a couple of percent of the 100 trillion, which is still done human to human. I think the reason is that this is the epiphany that I had that started the business, really, is that it's actually a communication and negotiation problem. It's not a payments problem at all. And there are very good reasons why people have used humans for 6,000 years to do this. So the way we're different is to recognize, basically, instead of old me trying to come with, as everyone else does, here's a different way of doing this. Please just do it this way instead. It's saying, there's very good reasons you've done this. We're going to make it work, as you said in the intro, we're going to make it work how you would do it yourselves and how you are doing it. But it's going to be an AI, and therefore it's going to be scalable, and it's going to be also optimizable and able to achieve things that you can't because of the way it works. But yeah, what's really different is saying, stop telling everyone to do it differently and say, no, I get why you did it that way. Let's just make that into something that an AI can do for you instead.
Yeah. Now, you're based in New York City, and obviously it's a financial hub. And so there's some kind of obvious reasons why a company like yours and why you would want to be based there. But tell me about your experience being an entrepreneur with a startup in New York City. How has that colored, shaped, influenced sort of your mentality?
Yeah, I came over here from London, where I'd been living for many years building GoCardless. And I remember at the time, people often tell you not to change too many things in your life at once. I decided to move continent, quit my previous exec role, move in with my girlfriend, and move to New York and start Lunos all in one go. So it was a relatively bold set of
Do you have
combined
a
decisions.
shrink? Are you paying a shrink to be there on standby? Because that's a lot.
Yeah, the one that I think was the least good idea within it actually was the timing, because we also moved to New York in January, which people did say, are you sure you want to move to New York in January? So that one I think was like the biting -15, -20 Celsius that threw in with that was probably the most self-inflicted wound, I think.
Yeah, you still have your nose attached to your face, which is you obviously got through it. But man, I remember when we moved out here, I came out on a scouting trip in January, uh, and I was like, what am I doing? And it was exactly as you described. I was like, this is cold. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think since then, it's been New York is I love the place. It is obviously a very intense place. I remember coming back to London after a few months and thinking, it's funny, I never realized London was actually a quiet, leafy, green village when you leave the concrete jungle. So, it's been an intense experience, but it's been such a rewarding experience. I don't regret it for a second, but certainly I did things in a fairly bold way, I suppose.
So, I mean, actually, I'm going to pull on that thread for a quick second because I do think people who live in community love to hear how other people see it when they come. Like, how would you describe? I mean, London being an iconic city, London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, et cetera. Um, Culturally speaking, what have been sort of the biggest differences that you've noticed in terms of operating in this space?
I agree with the people whose theory is we're almost sort of divided by a common language in a sense, in that I think you think it's much more similar than it is. And then, as you get to know it, I mean, I still, even to this day, I keep hearing new words that Americans say totally differently to us, and I find them out in some way. Where someone said to me the other day that a scheme is kind of like, it's not necessarily a bad thing in Britain. This was yesterday, and a scheme in America is much more, you're scheming. So, the equivalent of like the new children's school meal scheme in the UK or something sounds very odd in America. So I think it's kind of, to be honest, it's been an experience of just constantly finding more fascinating, and I love it. I'm fascinated by different cultures, but I think I've definitely been surprised at the depths of the differences, despite having been here before. But New York itself, I think the startup scene compared to London kind of reflects the cities. The New York scene it's big, it's intense, it's hustly, it's grindy, it's got this incredible energy to it that, the London scenes come on leaps and bounds, but I think you like the imprint of the two cities comes across in how they approach startups too.
What do you think the advantage, other than the obvious you know, access to people who move a lot of money and who finance things, and companies that have a lot of accounts payable and receivable issues. Um, Other than that, what do you think the advantages of having a startup in New York City are?
Those are pretty big advantages that you've said other than.
So none. I've basically uncovered. There's no
No,
other advantages.
I mean,
It's
I
super
think that
expensive. It's loud. It's.
I
I'm
think the
curious.
company one, the customer side is bigger than I had anticipated. I think it's one of there's some things where you can know it academically and you can experience it viscerally, and they're not quite the same thing. Like obviously, look, I'd seen the economic stats. I knew that America was bigger than the UK. This wasn't a surprise, but the practical ways in which that turns out, anything from like whatever segment of ICP you look at and how narrow it and how big it is in the US to a friend in London had messaged me something about like, oh, I'm thinking about different ways to sort of reach the tech audience for voice agents. Like, what do you think are the best? Like, I'm trying to think of some niche channel to do this. And that morning, I had cycled past a massive sign somewhere in downtown saying, like, basically advertising to founders their AI voice agent. I thought, well, here I just cycle past people putting billboards up because it's dense enough and crazy enough that this happens. And on the London side, they were thinking, oh, what's the best way to actually reach these people? So I think that just really cemented in me like that. There's something about the scale and the density that I think is another league when it comes to what you get with such a big market and so many companies in one place.
I think you're hitting on something. You've said it in a different way than I've ever heard that resonates more with me in my own experience is the density issue and how that impacts it. Because, I mean, when you're out in New York City and you're at a cafe and a nondescript cafe, I mean, this is like even a local chain, you might be sitting next to a life changing conversation. Like they're just
Yeah.
people are just everywhere. And that, celebrity sightings is like the smallest thing. Like, they're everywhere, but like just amazing consequential people are everywhere, and they're right within a couple of miles or kilometers of each other. So, okay. But listen, I think we started this conversation in your office, but I want to continue it because I think when I asked you about, when you were 5 years old, did you dream of being an AI startup founder? And of course you didn't, but what is it unbelievable to you where you're at now, or does it make sense when you look back?
I mean, it absolutely makes sense as I look back. I think it's so hard looking forward. I mean, that as I said to you the other day, when I was five, I wanted to be an astronaut. I mean, frankly, I still do want to be an astronaut, but as a Brit, I looked at the people at the time who'd been British astronauts, and there were three, and two were half American, half British, and actually went with NASA and were mechanical engineers. And like, I'm not half American, so I abandoned that one. The third had won a competition with the Russians, which in the 90s didn't necessarily seem like the best bet for me as a as a small child. So I decided that it would make much more sense to just make enough money to be able to pay my way into space, which I still very much do want to do. So when you asked the question, I was like, oh, maybe it actually does all lead directly from my my dreams of being an astronaut. But yeah, I don't. Um, I'm not someone that was like the extreme entrepreneur as a child, like constantly trying to sell things. I was more the stifled entrepreneur. I came up with the idea of buying packs of Pokémon cards when I was 11 and selling like the Charizards to people. But unfortunately, there was no payment infrastructure at the time, and I was in a rural village in North Yorkshire, so I like had to abandon my plan to sell prized Pokémon cards on the internet because I didn't know how to do it. So I suppose I was always a bit more stifled rather than necessarily able to act on them.
But the instinct was there. It was
Yeah.
there. I hear that clearly. And the astronaut thing how does the space and the astronaut theme has played out even in the brand of Lunos or Lunos, depending on where we're talking. It plays out now. Like, how have you extended that into the brand that you're building?
Yeah, I think the connection must be purely subconscious, subliminal, rather than rather than intentional, because I hadn't thought of this until now. But the story of the brand is one I'm actually kind of really proud of, I suppose. So, have you ever done a rebrand, by the way? Is this something
Yes.
yes, you of course you have.
It's not a small thing.
Yeah, and there's always the three options. And there's always one option that is actually the good option that you should pick, and no one ever does because it's just a bit too bold. And we did a rebrand at GoCardless, and the team did a fabulous job. And we went through it. We had the internal team, we had the agencies, and of course there were three, and we picked one that we thought was really good and was slightly safer than the one that we were a bit worried about. Whereas this time with the fabulous people I was doing our thinking of our initial brand with, we'd been discussing the fact that to the outside, people think of this $100 trillion world as kind of like, surely this isn't a mess. Whereas everyone inside knows that it's just carnage. And in fact, it's the Wild West out there in terms of getting your invoices paid. So we sort of had this concept, and then the idea was, well, why don't we actually lean into that? And this line, taming the wilds of receivables, was kicking around in our heads. And this was the third option, which was, let's be different. Let's lean into it. Let's go bright pink. Let's have the space cowboys. Let's wrangle revenue, tame receivables, all the rest. And it was one of those where at first, like, on the call, we almost dismissed it. We were like, I mean, this one's amazing, but we're not going to do this one.
But we're never going to do that one.
I mean, come on, like, it's amazing, but should we return to the others? And then the next morning, I just thought, you know what, like, time to have some courage. Let's actually do this. So it's like I'm picking that one.
So it literally came from you sleeping on it and going, you know what? No, we're going to go bold this time.
Exactly. And now one of our, we have our values. There's only 3 single word values, and one of them is courageous, and it's partly inspired by decisions like this, because you have to be willing to risk things. And now, honestly, I think this is like a superpower that we've chosen that other people haven't, because it would be so weird to, like, you're a late stage company. You can't just suddenly adopt Space Cowboy in bright pink. It just looks completely, like the authenticity is not there at all. Whereas
you got to,
we've chosen it now. So.
Yes, that's actually a really good thing. Like when you go bold early, it's people will buy it. When you go bold late, you run the risk of people going, "Oh, you have an identity crisis. What's wrong with you?" It's like the older person who buys the sports car that they really should.
Oh, that's such a good analogy. Yes, that's what you would be if someone tried to copy our brand. It's not copyable because you can't reverse engineer into it. You look like the aging person buying the cliched sports car.
Yeah, I like trading in your spouse for the newer model. That kind of cliched sort of thing, right? Now behind you is a picture of an article that kind of ties into the story. I think if that's the article. The Guardian
yes.
article. You did a great PR stunt that I think worked pretty effectively. Tell us about that.
Yeah. It was as we were, coming out of I wouldn't really call it stealth. That's a topic for another day. But, as we were announcing ourselves to the world, we were thinking about what to do to mark this. And at this point, obviously we'd figured out the brand and we were working through it. And it was in conversation with Alex, our head of growth, and then the PR team that we were working with, who were really great, Maury and Ryan. And it just sort of came out of like, we started kicking around these ideas of how about we, lean into this even more. How about we do something? And then someone, I think it was Maury maybe, I was like, what if we got a real cowboy? What if we got a horse? And then again, it was one of those ideas. This is where that courageous value we try and live by is one of those. At first, you almost dismiss it. You're like, yeah, sure, we could send a cowboy to lasso the Wall Street bull, but should we get back to what we're actually going to do? And then again, you have this moment where you think, maybe that's not silly. Maybe we should actually do it. And then the next thing there's the Slack message with, just heard from the commissioner's office about the permit for the horse, and you think, okay, this turns out you need a permit, by the way, to bring a horse into Manhattan.
Not shocking. You probably need like a gazillion permits for what you did. Yeah, right.
They were actually stopped. The horse box was stopped on the way in. You're not even allowed to. I thought it was reasonable to think the Wall Street bull to ride around and lasso the Wall Street bull, maybe you need something. But even to bring the horse into Manhattan at all, actually, it turns out you can't bring a horse in a horse box into Manhattan without getting stopped by the police and asked for your permit. So, don't try this at home, people. But yeah, then we thought, let's do it. And then the next thing there we were amongst hundreds of really quite bemused tourists handing out mini cowboy hats and, getting ready to swirl the lasso, which, by the way, is actually a bit easier than I thought. I was a bit worried I'd be really incompetent at the lasso, but it turns out to be, it's kind of a bit more straightforward.
You've got a key component of truly becoming a space cowboy nailed. So now you just got to take the lasso up into space, do that, and that's your next bit.
Yeah, I guess in the zero gravity, it would be interesting to throw a lasso in zero
Well,
gravity.
like a boomerang, it wouldn't
Yeah.
work as designed, but it would be interesting nonetheless. Yeah. So you do this thing, and I mean, so what was the attention you got? Because right now, I mean, I think you and I were talking about it, there's tens of thousands of startups just in AI. So many of the ones now are AI related, but to get attention, even if you are really unique, it's still this. It's hard to break through the noise. So, what was the impact for you of doing that?
Yeah, it's become one of those things that kind of feels a bit iconic for us within the company, and is a thing that we're known for beyond it. So I think it's been fantastic to see. The thing you actually see on the wall is the Guardian covering it, where the words are cowboys, lassos, and nudity. Is the opening. AI startups turn to stunts for attention in a crowded market is the name of the Guardian article that they wrote with, and that's the cowboy on the horse you can probably make out in the background. So um, I mean, that the fact that we have a Guardian article written about us obviously is a testament to the success of the stunt, and we regularly get people that, oh yeah, I saw that stunt, all right, you're the guys with the cowboy. So I think it's one of those where I think it's like an unfair advantage to be willing to be different and to actually follow through on it with courage, because everything that we do now kind of ties back to a better story and is more memorable than it would be if we were another blue fintech with normal AI branding.
I'm really, really diving into like the what's really resonating for me is like you mentioning that you have these values and that courage is one of them, and then seeing how you've acted on that and sort of stating the value creates a decision making that's more in alignment, and the decision making reinforces the value. That there's this sort of this loop that you need to continue to do. First of all, what are the other two values that we haven't talked about that are important to you in the business?
Yeah, so the three values, it's this is an odd source of inspiration, but this is actually inspired. I'm for my sins a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I heard Nick Sirianni saying, "We are tough, detailed, together." And he just stopped speaking. I was like, I mean, this is wonderful. He's, most people with their corporate values, I'd still be talking in 5 minutes time about trying to define them a little bit. Whereas he just stopped, and I just had this vision of in an interview with a candidate saying R3 and just stopping and then waiting for them to expect me to continue speaking. But no, I'm done.
I'm glad we
They're
could
the
wrap up
values.
this. Once you say the other two, we can
So
wrap up the podcast, which is nice, and we'll be done.
yeah, so we are curious, courageous, and relentless.
Okay, so love that. Curious, courageous, and relentless. We've talked a little bit about courage, which we'll come back to. How does the curiosity play out in the business?
Yeah, the the three of them somewhat align together in a sequence. The reason we say them in that order is because we like to think that it's super important, especially in a world like ours, where you're trying to create an AI worker that does a job like a humans have done for thousands of years. You have to make sure that you are extremely open to ways of doing things, extremely um, curious about why as well as what, so you can simultaneously take the way that it's currently being done and, like, frankly, much more than in many businesses, just do it that way because there's pretty good reasons people do many of these. But have the curiosity to unpack it and explore it and dig in, because it's that fine balance between doing it the way it's been done, but with an AI and finding better ways. So yeah, we'd like to start with the curiosity there, and then obviously the courage comes in terms of the actual decisions you take, and the relentless comes in how you pursue that and how you go about and do it. So that's why we think of it as the kind of the curiosity is almost the foundation, because you have to make sure that you've got the right options on the table, and if you're not curious enough, there's kind of no opportunity for the rest of the values.
But these values are really important. I find curiosity to be one of the most impactful things, but also one that takes some real sustained, relentless, if you will, intention, so that you're not, because by default we tend to want to go with figure things out, right? Which kind of runs against being curious, because it's like, look, I need some fixed things here because everything can't be a variable that I'm digging into, right? So how are you as you grow? You've doubled in at least doubled in size, right? You're building a team, you're getting more people. What are you learning about your ability to stay and infuse curiosity into the culture as you grow that maybe is a surprise to you or maybe not, but just share some insights about that part of it because that's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. I think I come at these, at GoCardless, I joined when there were about 30 people. I left, having been chief product officer, chief growth officer. I left when maybe it was 900 or something. So we're still in the bit kind of before, before I began the last journey. And therefore, one of the things I try and be conscious of is there's loads of things that I know and have got the battle scars from doing in that scale up journey from 30 to 900 beyond. And then I'm kind of constantly thinking, is this, what's the right time for some of these to come in? Because the stuff I know from a 500-person company is obviously not always tremendously relevant. And frankly, half of it changes now because, I mean, I don't think a 500-person company will be the same in the age of AI compared to, what it was probably 5, 10 years ago when GoCardless was 500. So I'm kind of constantly asking myself these questions. And I think how culture scales and how you infuse it is one of those. Kind of the easiest for me is to try and embody them and be them. And for me personally, I think I'm naturally very curious and pretty relentless. Courageous is the one that I think for everyone just always takes that's kind of the aspirational one in a way, if you like, because it just always takes, well, it takes courage, right? It takes courage to be courageous. So I think, I think the first thing that I do is try and always role model them. But I don't think that's actually enough. I think you have to think about the situations where, kind of as you were saying, where they're in conflict with things. Well, how does the curiosity hit the relentlessness? And can you be too curious and not relentless enough if you spend too much time looking at the different options around this and vice versa? I think that's the really hard bit where, yeah, I'm not sure I have the answer.
Well, because I was wondering, one of the three is not speed. And there's this sort of, I mean, I worked in Silicon Valley years ago and I've been around, the cultures where it's like break, the whole break stuff and just go fast and break stuff kind of thing. I wonder from your perspective how you balance the need for speed with the sometimes slowing curiosity can feel like it's slowing you down almost. And so there's this constant tension of like, I know we're supposed to be curious, but we got to just get it done. How do you
Yeah.
manage that? How do you look at it, I
Yeah.
guess?
And I've seen that balance too. It's kind of, this is one of the values that's a little bit closer to one we had at GoCardless, where we kind of had that problem of how do you balance these. I think while we say it last, relentless is kind of the ultimate value for us, and we want ourselves and everyone in it to be incredibly relentless in terms of how we go after it. We kind of find the word captures a bit more what we mean. It's not like, speed is a scalar, and like velocity is the vector, right? And the vector is what matters. And therefore I think relentlessness for me is also, it's both about how you're doing it and your response to challenges and your response to it, but it's also more directed. And therefore for us, I think we have to keep relentless front and center, and we have to make sure, if a candidate to join us isn't relentless enough, then kind of doesn't really matter how curious they are. And how much, I think it ties with courageous sometimes, but like it doesn't really matter how curious they are if we don't think they're relentless enough. So I think that's one of the trade-offs that I've seen go the other way. And I've seen that as you get much bigger, you kind of end up with a corrupted version of the values. And therefore I think the number one thing we need to make sure, and I need to be really clear about, is like, it's not enough to be curious unless you bring that relentlessness. I don't want someone going off for a week to think about something they could have thought about in an hour in the morning, because they have to be relentless enough to, yeah, they should want to go and look at all these areas, but they should constrain themselves and think like, this is the right amount of time to spend thinking about this, if you see what I mean. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's probably actually the number one trade-off in our values, where we need to make sure that like relentless does trump curious in the right circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you treat mistakes these days? Because I find a lot of people, as they mature and they have more experience, they also tend to have a different, more nuanced view of how to deal with making mistakes and how to differentiate between good mistakes and bad mistakes. How are you? How's your perspective on that these days in building this?
Yeah, I think I'll start with sort of the rationalist version, which is how I think about it in a, for others, frankly, and in a larger in a larger team. I think that one of the things that's very different about the founder journey is like your own emotional and psychological journey on it yourself. So we can come back to my own mistakes, but let me tell you how I think about other
Tell
people.
us all of your mistakes, Duncan, just between you and me.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to other people, that I've always been a firm believer, as a chief growth officer, I think you have to be that there's a difference between a good mistake and a bad mistake. I mean, I often for people who play any poker, I'm not really much of a poker player myself, but I'm always annoyed by people like, oh, I can't believe I folded my 3-7 offsuit and then it flops 3-3-7. It's I just can't deal with this mentality. It's like, no, you have to be able to separate whether it was a good decision at the time from whether it worked out. Those are two variables that like you have to be able to separate to some degree. And I think it's really important to create a culture where people can experiment and fail. But I'd actually say, to your question of how it's evolved, the counter argument to that is Napoleon, right? Like, I want a general who's lucky. I can't determine whether he's making good or bad decisions on this. All I can judge is the results, and therefore, like, I'll take one who's lucky because it's basically some combination of pure chance, but also the thing that I can't see and actually makes a big difference. So I probably started a bit too forgiving of them if I thought they were the right decision. I think you have to balance that with, I mean, look, if someone just keeps having failed experiments, then it's probably because there's something I'm missing about that not as good as I think they are. So I think my evolution has come like reaction against the can't tell 2020 hindsight from good decisions, but also a little bit of this kind of Napoleon school of like, I want people that make good enough decisions that they appear to be lucky from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you're in the right neighborhood, but in the wrong role in the neighborhood. And sometimes it's just an issue of realigning the function that you're doing because it's just not the right fit. I wonder in your life thus far, can you remember a time when you were really not in the right space doing what space there I use that word again. You weren't in space, Duncan, not yet. You weren't, you were misaligned with who you really are. Have you ever had any experience like that? And if so, how did you deal with it?
I think the period from when I first came to the US is probably the closest to that. I am a very full on person and wasn't someone who was sat there during my nearly decade building GoCardless, constantly thinking what the next thing would be. So I left without I didn't know what Lunos was going to be when I left, right? And then, as I said, I made this kind of crazy decision to change all these things at once in my life and move country, move going with a girlfriend, quit, etc. And it is kind of it shows you what's tied up with your identity and what's not when you go from like a very early 30s, CXO in a couple of $1 billion company that like kind of, people wanted to speak to me and, I knew loads of people because I was in London, etc. And then you suddenly like plant yourself on the other side of the world, and then it kind of challenges a bit what you are, right? Because now no one invites you to the Wimbledon quarterfinal in hospitality anymore because they don't care. So there's a certain challenge to that, and I think during the period before I, came up with Lunos, I think that's probably the closest I've been to something where it's like, interesting.
When you think a few years down the line, and I'm not talking about an exit in your future or just, that the standard stuff. I'm talking about what kind of organization do you want to be able to look back on and say, I built that?
That's a great question. An organization like Lunos is always the problem's not sexy, right? And I embrace that. I often say it's a fascinating solution to an extremely boring problem of this it's like $100 trillion niche in a way. So I think that probably in some form is going to come out in the organization alongside obviously my personality, my beliefs and things come out, as do those of the early employees. So I think that aspect of it will probably be part of who we are. Like we have to be I wouldn't say the shadows because that sounds like some kind of spy novel or something, but I think that we have to take pride in being something where ultimately what the agent to agent future is going to do, right, is it's going to increase economic growth, is a very simple way of putting it. Businesses fail because they don't have cash flow. They don't actually usually fail because no one likes their products, or most of the time they don't even fail because they're not very good at like creating and selling them. They fail because they're bad at managing cash flow. So we're something that will prevent businesses from failing. And ultimately, especially in this agent to agent version where you start getting agents on both sides, will, ultimately it'll facilitate trade. We'll all be richer. We will all be in a faster growing economy. So I'd love the organization to be something that I suppose kind of takes pride and relishes that in the way that I do, and isn't like wanting to be some, consumer, some consumer startup that everyone's, necessarily heard of on the street. I think there's something where you have to kind of own that, and you have to say, well, you know what? That's actually much bigger impact than a flash in the pan thing that for 6 months everyone wants your soft toy. This is something that's much deeper and much more impactful in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and businesses are very personal and they touch people's lives and they sustain their lives and raise families and fund schools and healthcare and everything else. So it's a pretty human story underneath all that accounts, receivables. So yeah, how is this, what have you learned about yourself in the last, year or two?
Mm. Yeah, that is an interesting one. I I've learned a lot about myself in the last couple of years. That's for sure. I don't think anyone can go through the experience of starting a company and not learn a lot about themselves. I kind of maybe some people do. If so, I'd be fascinated to hear from you because I can't really I can't really comprehend how that could be the case. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you. Please reach out.
Duncan, I've met a few people who appear not to learn anything about themselves ever, but that's another podcast.
Yeah, I would say that I've probably emerged a bit more deeply self-aware. No, I've worked in places throughout my time where people will kind of tell you how it is. I started my time in fintech in fintech consulting where you were literally stack ranked against everyone else in Europe in your thing. Like I think these environments give you a sort of superficial self-awareness of what people think of you. But I think this has given me a greater awareness of what I think of me and what I'm really good at and less good at is probably the biggest thing that it's exposed. So yeah, the self sense rather than the perception of others.
I've worked in the awareness arena for a while, and it's hard to be self-aware. People are less self-aware than they think they are. And you struck me when I met you as someone who had a level of self-awareness that is not always seen in certain circles. And and I'm not just trying to blow smoke here. It's why I asked the question, because you're clearly thinking about it. I'm wondering what you could offer other entrepreneurs in terms of your experience in cultivating self-awareness. How do you cultivate self-awareness?
I wouldn't say I have any, particular tricks. I think to some degree it's something that you kind of have to work through and experience. But a couple of stories do spring to mind. So one is that I think you're constantly walking this tightrope of asking yourself, there's this thing I don't want to do. Why do I not want to do it? And what does that mean? Some things you don't want to do because you know you really should and you're dreading it. And you definitely should do it and you're the one that should do it and you should just go ahead. Other things you don't want to do and it just doesn't actually make sense for you to do it. And what that's telling you is you should find someone else to do it for you. And I think it's a very difficult line between two that you need to figure out, like sort of earlier in your career, the first time you actually have to exit someone for poor performance, you're probably on the first side. And if you're not aware of that and you're you're listening, like I would say do it. If you're thinking about this and you haven't decided to, please just do it because you should and you're just in the first one. But I think doing a startup exposes you to a lot more things where you're on this borderline between the two. As a solo founder, when should you hire someone to work with you on GTM? It's kind of an absolutely classic question of this genre of, well, it's entirely possible it's on either of those two sides. It depends on who you are and where you are and how clear it is that there is PMF for this idea. I think the really difficult ones are the ones that are on that line. And I think I've found that those sorts of decisions and how I've approached them have made me better at doing the ones that I should do and just am not, but also hopefully a bit more aware of the ones where it just does not. I could force myself, but the cost in energy terms and sort of personal, like the psychology that I need to keep driving the business forward is just not worth it. And if it's relatively easy to pay your way around it, then sometimes you should just pay your way around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's some real wisdom there too. And being able to, boy, that GTM point you just made is like 5 stars truth right there. Who do I let in to do this? Because it's boy, you can go down the wrong path if you give away your idea to somebody else too far. And the discretion and the wisdom that goes behind making those decisions is not something to be taken lightly. All right, in our remaining moments here, really looking forward, do you have any like exciting things that you can let us in on that we don't know? That tell me all your secrets, Duncan. What do we have? What do you have exciting? I know it's not an exciting. Maybe to some people it's not exciting, but to me, building a company, building a team, growing something is always exciting. Like, so what are
Me
you
too.
excited about? And do you have any announcements to make?
Yeah, the thing that I'm most excited about is something that we'll be doing in the next few months, which is, I've talked about this agent to agent network, right? We've started on the receivable side, where, I mean, in some regards, I've spent a decade there, right? Previously, I had a different solution. Now I've got this new one and helping people to get paid. But this is a network problem. There's tens of millions of people doing this crazy, mad. You should see the quotes we get. Brain rot is a word that comes up surprisingly often when people describe this work. This brain rot that all these people have to do, and we are super excited to be shortly starting work on adding the other side of this network, which is the payable side. So the analogy I always use for this is, at the minute we're kind of giving people a driverless car for their receivables, and it's great. Like, you get to sit in it and you can do other things which everyone wants to do rather than the brain rot, and it'll work better than, it'll drive better than you, and you get to sit in it and whatever, watch TV, in this case run your business. But the magic really comes when everyone else is in a driverless car too, because then the driverless cars can drive closer to each other and get to their destinations faster and reduce traffic. In our world, that's what happens when you start having agents on both sides, because you go from everything happening at the speed of one human emailing the other human who, may be in a different time zone and asleep, may take ages to get back to you and look at this, to the whole world of this $100 trillion happening at the speed of agents, where you can have these situations where there's 5 businesses trading, and one of them is in a position to be able to pay the invoice early, and one business 3 businesses away is actually the one that's desperately in need of cash flow, and all of this is suddenly possible to connect together. So I'm super excited about the creation of this network, where you start having agent to agent interaction, and everything starts being a driverless car around you, rather than just sitting in your single driverless car enjoying the fact that you're not driving and it's working better.
You just reminded me of something that, like, oh, you can hear the sounds of New York City in the background and the cars honking and stuff. That at some point is probably going to go away. You're not going to need honking if you've got AI running the show.
That's going to be really nice.
Yeah. We can
Anyone who's ever been to India also knows that that's going to be really nice.
Absolutely, 100%. Let's finish with this. Look, a guy like you, a man like you, is always doing the next personal challenge. So, what do you have personally? What is your next aspirational personal challenge that you're taking on?
Yeah, I have collected licenses for things, I suppose, is one way of putting it. I got my skydiving license when I was 18 one summer. My friends from school went to Ayia Napa or somewhere, and I went to Nottingham to do my my skydiving course instead.
As you do. Yeah. Off to Nottingham,
and instead, then of scuba diving and sailing, and the latest that I've picked up since coming to America is flying very little planes, which I hasten to add, given I am an early stage founder still, they're currently very small planes. I would like them to be bigger planes and faster planes that requires, Lunos to be successful. So please, finance people listening, come talk to me about Lunos. But I think that for me, I really want to get to the point where I can kind of fly something really exciting. I want to get to the point where I can do some of the aerobatics in particular. I hope my girlfriend may listen to this or may not, and may not approve of this, but I really would like to get to the point where I can do like a barrel roll in a plane. I think that would just be, I'd feel like I was a fighter pilot at that point.
I think we need to make an introduction to Tom Cruise at some point. No, but that's really cool. Gosh, I don't know that I don't flying just I like to be in a large jet, but the small planes kind of scare me. So
So I was once traveling in South America, and there was a little plane that went from, I think it was from La Paz down to the jungle. And the flight before me, the people I met, it was like a 8-person plane or something, and it basically takes off at like 5,000 meters and just lands at sea level. So it just flies down is all it does for about half an hour. And the people on the flight before me, the plane had fallen out of the sky for about 45 seconds. And what I found fascinating as I met these people in, sort of the bar of the only hostel there, was that half of them thought this was the coolest thing that had ever happened to them. And the other half were absolutely terrified and somewhat traumatized by it. And there was no reconciling. You just couldn't reconcile between the two. And I know that as long as I survived it, I just knew as I spoke to them that I would think, oh my God, that's so cool. I got to fall out of the sky for 45 seconds like an action movie, and then here I am in a bar drinking, telling you about it. But I just thought it was one of those, like, people just divide into two mutually unintelligible halves on that question.
well, I tell you what, not getting paid can feel like you're falling out of the sky and going to crash, and you're giving some order to that. So let's finish with this. Business owner is listening to this. Um, who should work with you? Do you have a too small of an organization number? What size organizations can you help, and who should reach out to you right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the minimum size is when it's really annoying for you. We have people with tens of thousands of invoices a month. We have people with tens, but it's just really annoying to them. So, if you're annoyed by it and you're annoyed enough to do something about it, you are not too small. In particular, we do love talking to larger businesses that are, dealing with scaling problems. But really, it's anyone who is in this world of B2B invoicing is annoyed by how much work it is taking them and their team to get paid and how fast they're getting paid. And small caveat, uses at least semi-popular online software to do so that we can connect to your data and you can plug and play and get started in hours rather than anything else. So yeah, if you're annoyed by it, or your finance team is annoyed by it, then check us out at lunos.ai, and we'd love to talk to you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I hope some people do reach out after watching this. Duncan, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for coming to the bigger stage, and I'm really looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much. I had a wonderful time too.